Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cloud-Based Mayhem. A great show for you today with my friend Matt Warren. Matt is a journalist with XC Mag. And those of you who read the magazine have seen his stuff a lot. He covered the X-Alps for a couple races, including 2019. He and Ed were shacked up with my wife and my daughter in near Salzburg in Paul Guschelbauer's house. And that's where we got to know each other a little bit. But I've worked with him on some articles over the years, and he and his friend Miriam Frankel have just put out his first book about behavioral science called Are You Thinking Clearly? 29 Reasons You Aren't and What to Do About It. And Matt reached out a few weeks back and said, I think, this isn't specific to flying, but Matt's a pilot, and a lot of this stuff is very specific to the decisions we make and why we often make very poor decisions. So those of you who are familiar with Thinking Fast and Slow with Daniel Kahneman will recognize a lot of this, but whereas that's really heavy on science and really just one side of kind of behavioral science, he's obviously the kind of founding father on all this. Matt and Miriam's book is much more wide-ranging and covers a lot more topic. Obviously, these 29 reasons we don't think very well. We're not really necessarily in the driving seat when we think we are. But it's just, we got into some really cool terrain here, and obviously just touched on a lot of different things. And he ties it in really well with piloting and how it all ties together. So I'm going to read you a little bit here from the summary of the book. Do emotions really cloud your thinking? Are habits holding you back? Is AI manipulating your mind? Does IQ help you think better? Every one of our thoughts, actions, moods, and decisions is shaped by a whole array of factors, most of which we don't pay any attention to. From culture, time, and language to genetics, technology, and the microorganisms living inside us, even our own unconscious routines and habits, it's clear that we aren't always in the driving seat. So we start there and get into the book, and I know you're going to love it. This was a lot of fun, and we dove into some fun things to talk about and some interesting things to think about. Enjoy. Matt, good to see you here, bud. It's been a while. It's been a minute, and I didn't know you were. I know you were a journalist, but I didn't know you were working on a book. So I'm excited to talk about your book and behavioral psychology. And it's not a book about paragliding, but it all definitely kind of fits and why we make bad decisions. But welcome to the mayhem, and it's good to shoot it with you for a little bit.
Great to see you, Gavin. Obviously, I was there reporting on the X-Alps in 2019, following you along the way, and good to see you're still alive and kicking after that.
Yeah. Well, it is a little dicey from time to time, but made it through. For those who aren't aware, let's start this off by, who are you and why did you write this book, and how long have you been in journalism? But how do you define yourself?
Well, I left university in the late 90s. Didn't really know what I wanted to do other than travel and do things. The do things was a bit kind of ill-defined, but I figured that journalism was a good way to do things, to try different things, to go to different places. So I started traveling around the world. I wrote 7 or 8 Lonely Planet guidebooks to Indonesia, South Africa, Thailand. Settled into a couple of newspaper jobs in my 30s. And for the past 6 or 7 years, I've been writing for Cross Country magazine and also a site called theconversation.com. And we specialize in turning academic research into content for the general public. And that content gets read by about 150 million people every quarter. So, it was big news during the COVID crisis. A lot of our content got sent out to the other media, and you probably read it even if you weren't aware you were reading it. And out of that, having dealt with loads of different researchers from lots of different fields, psychologists, neuroscience, climate scientists, I thought, I want to write a book about this. I want to speak to people and delve inside the human mind and how it works and how we think. And so with my co-author, Miriam Frankel, we came up with Are you thinking clearly? 29 reasons why not and what to do about it.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the cover right now. I love it. Just a bunch of squiggly lines. And that's how my brain thinks most of the time. Just all over the map, you know. I mean, I rely on Sam Harris and his his waking up podcast and his waking up, meditation app to try to get that straightened out. But when I looked through, and I'll just read for the listener here a little bit, just about the book, the summary on where you can buy it and find out more about it. And it's on, all the platforms, Amazon and everything else, but it looks terrific. But the motherhood complex calls it an eye-opening and engaging richness of information that gives us a detailed insight into the strengths and weaknesses of human behavior. I read that and thought, Kahneman. This is all behavioral science, correct? Is it why we think we're making good decisions and we aren't?
I guess to summarize the book, we perhaps often assume that we're the captains of our ship, that we control all our thinking and our thinking goes in the direction we want it to. So what we did was look at the many reasons, external, or the many factors, external and internal, that manipulate and influence the way you think. So starting at the bottom, that's genetics, but then it's also things like habit, it's intuition, it's heuristics and bias, it's digital technology, it's whether you're in love, it's whether you're hangry, it's whether you're feeling emotional, it's even whether you believe in things like good and evil. So it's the full gamut of things, really. We even did a chapter on your gut microbiome, all the little organisms living in your gut. They outnumber your own cells 1.3 to 1 on a ratio. And it seems, it's a growing area of research, that they're actually, through your vagus nerve, potentially influencing, hijacking your thinking, almost making you do what they want you to do. So, that bit's probably not so relevant to paragliding, but just to give you a flavor of how
but it might be. It sounds like listening to your gut.
Yeah, listening to your gut in both ways, intuitively, and what you put in your gut affects what goes on in your brain. Absolutely.
Did doing all this research really help your own thinking? Or is it still just, it's overwhelming? This is just too much.
We did actually do an epilogue. The last chapter of the book is how we applied it to our own thinking. So what we wanted to do with the book was not to go down the standard path of you need to think this way, there's one solution for everyone. There isn't. Everyone thinks differently. Everyone's vulnerable to different biases. Everyone has different conflicting factors sort of jostling for their attention. But so we applied it to ourselves, and I found that I was probably too optimistic. I need to be a bit more pessimistic. That's something perhaps we can talk about a bit later.
Yeah.
Will Gadd is a big defensive pessimist, and I've spoken to him about it for Cross Country magazine as well. But also the degree to which we can manage our emotions, how habitual we are, how much you rely on routine, what you're eating and what that might be doing to your mind, how much credibility you give your own memories, how intuitive you are, how good you are at paying attention. So I went through everything afterwards and gave myself a good going over.
Is there a kind of a test at the back of the book where you can go through and kind of find out where you sit on this spectrum of madness?
We reference a whole bunch of tests the whole way through. So things like the Creature of Habit scale is a 27-point test to establish how habitual you are. There's a Dirty Dozen test, which, on a rather darker note, establishes whether you may have psychopathic, Machiavellian traits in your character. These are psychological traits rather than like a diagnosable condition. There's all sorts of things you can do as you go along to test your own.
How many, as a percentage, just as an example, how many people would have dark psychological traits? They're Like you
Well,
said, is it 50%? Is it 80? I mean, are most of us a little bit dark?
On the dark traits, that's an interesting one. Obviously, there's like there are diagnosable psychiatric clinical conditions, particularly that you might relate to psychopathy, antisocial behavior disorder, for example. So we're not talking about those. We're talking about psychological traits, that would be how psychopathic you might be, i.e. how, for example, how much you care about what happens to other people, how much you can feel what they feel. Machiavellianism, how much you want to get ahead. And narcissism, how much you rate yourself, probably unrealistically. And all of us are somewhere on a spectrum with all of those three.
From your research, Matt, are these traits more genetic, or are they more learned? How does the nature nurture side of this really affect things?
Yeah, so the genetics plays a big part of it. It's about 40%, and then the rest of it is your environment, what's around you.
A lot.
So yeah, both. It's always a combination of the two. So you're not sort of like doomed by your genetics. You can change things. Your environment will turn the volume up or down, if you like.
Before we started recording, you started tapping into some of the 29 things. Could we do that take a little deeper dive? You were talking about optimism versus pessimism, for example. But I know you've got the list in front of you there, but they were fascinating.
So I guess optimism. So about 80% of us have an optimism bias. And that essentially means that we're likely to believe that things are more likely to go well than badly. And there's obviously a bit of a cult around optimism. We have the yellow smiley face on everything. We all talk about how we need to be happy and upbeat and stoked, and we have to look on the bright side. And the pessimists are kind of a downer, or a bit of an Eeyore, and you don't really want them around. But in something like paragliding or adventure sports, you do need to be a bit pessimistic as well. In fact, pessimism is probably a really good way of staying alive.
Will Gadd is he defines this so well. I mean, I remember going to our first launch on that Rockies Traverse, and he talked about that he already recognized that I was way too optimistic for his liking. It drove him nuts. And he said, Gavin, not only am I not optimistic, I'm looking for, I'm not a glass is half full guy. I'm looking for the rock that's going to break the glass.
Yeah.
And yet to participate in what he has participated in, he's kind of one of the original, the OGs for Red Bull. He has to be optimistic.
Yeah.
But he's constantly just, what can go wrong with this situation, which in my mind is exactly what you want.
Yeah.
To be an adventure athlete. You want, how is this environment going to kill me?
Yeah. But you don't stop there, do you? It's not. Yeah. I think people maybe go, well, if I'm pessimistic, I'll never fly. And as Will told me, we're all optimists because we're going up under a bit of fabric to Cloudbase and, getting smashed to pieces on, in meter up thermals. So we need a degree of optimism, but the pessimism comes into play where you go exactly as you just said. Where do I identify the rock that's going to break me? And crucially, what am I going to do about avoiding it? It's about mapping the terrain in a slightly negative way, and could I get stuck in that valley breeze, and how will I avoid not doing so? Have I got that valley looks really bad to land in. If I get stuck in it, what am I going to do? And how am I going to avoid being there at all in the first place? It's about looking for the potential dangers and then actually coming up with a really positive plan for dealing with them. If you go down that route. So
is that something that can be learned, Matt? I mean, one of the things that I feel I'm not bragging at all in this, but one of the things that I feel has kept me alive for my 50 years on the planet doing all the stuff that I do is that when I get in those situations, I'm not a freeze, that freeze, flight, or fight. I'm really a fighter, and things get very clear for me. And one of the things that I know is not conscious, but is my heart rate plummets. So it goes the opposite of what most people do. Mine goes down to almost resting heart rate.
Yeah.
And I just see the world incredibly clearly.
Yeah.
This is what I need to do. This is how I'm going to survive this situation. And it's instinct. I don't know where that came from. That's crazy. How can I control my whole heart rate? I'm not, I haven't practiced this at all. It's just what happens.
Yeah. I guess you use the word, there were a couple of interesting things there. You used the word instinct, that's intuition, if you like. So our brains don't have time to work like computers and take all the inputs and then sort of rationalize them into, a carefully computed answer. We don't have mental bandwidth for that. We'd be there all day working out just whether to turn left or right. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we have to make these guesses, these intuitive guesses. When you first start out doing something, your intuitions may be really quite bad. You make bad calls. And you really need to, in those situations, engage more of your rational mind and actually think through a little more slowly what's going on. In your case, though, you are an expert paraglider, outdoorsman, etc. Your intuitions, your instincts in these situations have been honed by years of experience. So you can trust those intuitions much more.
So it is learned.
It is learned. Intuitions are learned. Yeah. There are subtle patterns that you have spotted that you probably weren't even aware you spotted. And over time, some of those patterns look the same, so they've reinforced themselves. And your instincts, whether you turn left or right in a certain situation, you probably don't know why you're doing that. But there will be bits of your brain that have learned through experience that you should do one or the other. Make the correct choice. So intuition, I think, when you're a beginner in anything, you have to be quite careful with your intuitions, and then you can probably learn to trust them more as you go on. I mean, I think Kriegel talks quite a lot about this, and he now describes himself as a much more intuitive pilot. And that allows him to be a lot more creative as well.
Yeah.
And, if you can trust those intuitions and follow them, then you've got some mental bandwidth up to think about what your next move might be as well.
I do find that really interesting, talking to
like Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah,
Thomas. Talking to him about, back early on, remember when he would take his night pass really early in the race? And he said it was just because Kriegel doesn't like to be around other people. He wouldn't even typically use it because he'd already be ahead, but it was just enough. It was enough to just get him a little bit more ahead so he could just do his thing and not be influenced by other people, even in the air with him, or on the ground. He wanted to be out in front and do his thing and, let his intuition rule the game.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Which is interesting because we learn as pilots that we're faster and better when we're with other pilots. That's not how you'd win a comp. Certainly, you wouldn't do that in race to goal. You wouldn't want to lead out all the time. You're going to bomb out all the time. It's not going to work. Yeah. But it works for him really well in an environment like the XLs.
Absolutely. We spoke with the father and manager of one of the world's greatest chess players, Magnus Carlsen. And he's known as a very intuitive chess player. And of course, humans can't play chess like computers because they don't have the bandwidth to run through every single possible move. So you just have to have a degree of intuition and instinct. Now, for someone like him, who's a very intuitive world champion chess player, intuition works because he's played so many games of chess and he's already a super talent. he knows that probably if he feels he should do this move in a very high-paced, high-stress environment, it'll probably be the right one. If I suddenly move into chess and try and do the same thing, I'm checkmate in 2 moves, if that,
Right.
The same in flying, you just have to be aware of it, be aware of what your intuitions are, and learn to trust them over time, without giving them too much stock too early
on. So optimism bias, that's what you call that?
Well, no, we're talking about intuition, but yeah, your optimism bias will be most of us will expect things to go better than they are likely to.
Interesting. You said about 80% are like that.
Yeah, 80% of people have an optimism bias. We're also quite likely to update our beliefs or understanding of things based on good news rather than bad news. So, for example, and you can apply this to paragliding, but the example won't be paragliding. But for example, if I ask you what are the chances of you getting cancer, for example, and you say 50%, and I tell you it's actually about 30%, and then I leave it for a while, and then I come back to you and ask what your risk was, you'll probably move it pretty much towards the more optimistic result that you've been given, towards 30%. If you thought it was only 10% though, your risk of cancer was getting 10%, and I told you it was actually 30%, and then came back to you later and asked, you would only nudge your estimate up very slightly, maybe to 13, 14%. So that
really?
shows if I give you good news, you're much more likely to update your beliefs based on it than not. And that, that could pose a problem in paragliding, couldn't it? And how you approach risk and things like that.
I'm curious, you're a paraglider and you've written this book and done all this research. Do you think the 80-20 rule applies to pilots? Or is it more like 95? I mean, why in the world would we do what we do, given what we know? I mean, we all think it's not going to happen to us, but it happens to almost everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of absurd.
I totally agree with you. And a lot of pilots I know, a lot of pilots I've spoken with say that we constantly con ourselves, lie to ourselves about how dangerous this sport is. And I think that means that we have an optimism bias about it. And in a way we have to, because it spoils the fun when we're constantly thinking about the danger. But of course, if we apply that Will Gaddian defensive pessimism, we can go, yeah, it's a dangerous sport. How am I going to make it safer? What's my strategy? And run through it in a much more kind of systematic way.
When you did your research with Miriam, did you break people down into different, are adventure athletes, are adventure people, do they really skew the data in a certain way over just your people that live in the city that don't do anything, that watch sport?
I guess the data is the data in psychology is skewed towards university students.
Okay. Those are the ones you're doing the samples on.
Yeah, exactly. They tend to be the participants in the study, and and they do tend to be Western as well. Western, educated, intelligent.
So there's probably some social economic stuff. There's probably all kinds of things that are going to affect
It's all very biased already.
Got it. Okay.
So then you have to, you could probably guess that, yes, in paragliding, to answer your question, I think there is more. They are
more optimism bias in there. Yeah.
Because even when Will Gadd, we've given Will Gadd a lot of name checks here, but even when he's talking about defensive pessimism, being pessimistic, that's a good thing. We all have to be so optimistic just to do this thing.
Yeah, right. Let's dive into some of the other 29 things, because your list is fascinating. We could talk about optimism all day, but
there's a really good one around. We did one of the studies we looked at was by this guy called Peter Johansson, who's at Lund University in Sweden. And he did this brilliant bit of research into choice blindness. And this potentially applies to paragliding as well. So he applied some techniques he learned from magicians, and it was a bit of sleight of hand involved here. So, for example, I would show you, Gavin, 2 cards, and it's 2 different faces. And I would ask you which is most attractive. And you would go, the one on the right. I would then place the cards down and use a bit of sleight of hand. I would hand you the other card, the card you hadn't chosen, and tell you it was the one you had chosen. And you would go, yeah, that's the one, and even start justifying the choice that you hadn't made. So it would be things like, and then he'd ask, why did you make that choice? And they'd say something like, I really like their earrings. When the initial choice, the one they'd actually made, they hadn't even been wearing earrings. So this is a really weird phenomenon. And, you know, maybe in that, a related one, which maybe people have seen, is that on YouTube, you'll find it about the basketball players are passing a basketball between them. And you're asked to count how many passes they make. And at the end of it, they say, but did you spot the gorilla? And when you replay it, a gorilla walks through the basketball players.
And you totally don't see it.
You don't see it because you've been asked to look for the passing ball.
God, that shit blows my mind. It's just so bizarre.
You know, okay, we're bad at potentially bad at making choices. We don't really know why we make them in some cases, make decisions. We justify decisions we didn't after the fact, potentially. You know, so we make a really bad decision and we land. And then we say, we come up on the fly with our reason for making that decision.
You justify everything.
Our learning, does it? Yeah, we justify it after the fact. And the gorilla one, I think, suggests that, and as indeed the card one might, how much are we really paying attention? You know, flying, what are you paying attention to? If you're
if they, you know, from the picture one, you know, the 2 cards, and then here's the one that you didn't choose. Is that just peer pressure? Is that just clear? Is that just, this person who's giving me this test, I don't want to?
Yeah,
is that really comes from?
It's a really good question. In actual fact, they kind of allowed for that. So it's not kind of the white coat effect. It's not, I just don't want to offend the researcher. In fact, I think they used pupil dilation test at the same time to check for that.
Oh, so it's honestly what your brain is telling you.
It seemed to be really rigorous research.
Golly.
With beliefs, certain beliefs as well. If I made you a statement about what do you think about, you know, Donald Trump, for example, that would probably be too emotive. But you know, some kind of softer political idea, you know, I could literally swap the questionnaires around, and the same effect seemed to stay even when you were with a partner or you were with someone else. So even in a group, you can be just as, you know, in inverted commas, dumb.
Wow. I mean, so that does that come back to bias as well?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We're obviously, I mean, you know, and again, to go to this research, we can't say categorically this is what is going on here. But I think all these little studies we looked at in the book just point to the same sort of lesson, which is you do need to be aware that your brain works in these weird ways. It can rely on shortcuts, or does rely on shortcuts and biases, that your attention is very on and off and malleable and swings around, you know, all over the shop, and that we have to pay attention and we do have to be aware these sort of factors are in play. To answer your question about bias, yeah, I mean, we are riddled with it. Again, you know, this is a big Daniel Kahneman thing, which is, you know, we can't think through carefully every single decision and belief. We don't have time. Our brain doesn't have the computing power. We have to make shortcuts, you know, and those result in a whole range of biases. Some of them on you know, are helpful. They save us time. They make us allow us to make snap decisions. Other obviously are hugely damaging and involve all kinds of discrimination and bigotry and prejudice and so on and so forth, So we have to be aware of, our brain's tendency or vulnerability to it.
Did you find after you wrote this book and did all this research, has it really helped you process the world? Has it helped you? Is it helped guiding you through this myriad of, the gorilla thing? That to me that would help me to reaffirm the fact that I know I can't multitask.
Yeah.
We know we're bad at it.
Yeah.
Everything proves we're bad at it. We can't do email and talk and run the business, and we can't do this. It just doesn't work. And obviously it feels like women are much better at it because they can deal with a child and they've just got more going on. But I mean, I know that I wouldn't see the gorilla.
Yeah.
I just know that about myself. I got to count those balls. I got to count those balls, count the balls. The gorilla rocks right in front of me. I'm not going to see it.
I mean, I'd seen the video before a couple of years back and did the test again or watched it again for the book, and I still miss the gorilla. I followed the count the balls,
Amazing.
So it hasn't made me better. I think it's made me. It was really interesting because there were two of us, so we had two biased authors instead of one. So we were constantly going, "You're so biased. You've got this. You've got overconfidence bias. You've got." And obviously, when we say bias, there's so many different biases. So you can look it up. There's like a rosette, like a size of a planet with them all around there.
And they're all Venn diagramming together. And oh my God,
bias. You've got this bias, that bias, gambler's bias. And I think it just gave us a framework. A better framework for exploring our own minds and where our own fallibilities might be. And of course, a lot of these things have a positive side. Pessimism has a positive side, when it's within manageable reason. Obviously, it can spiral out of control and you can just sit there, unable to do anything because you feel that you're too pessimistic about everything. But, a degree of anxiety when you're flying, fear has an adaptive side. Obviously, it keeps you alive. If you think about it, your brain isn't designed, isn't programmed, isn't hardwired to be happy and content. It is hardwired to be alert. It is hardwired to keep you alive, to make shortcuts. So it's got enough processing power to wing it, basically. It doesn't really care whether you're happy and content. It just wants to keep you alive, Right. So when you start looking at it like that, you go, there's this massive.
That's helpful.
Cult. Yeah, there's a massive cult out there going, Gavin, you need to be happy. You need to be optimistic. There's only one way of doing things. But you're a completely unique human being with all these various things going on in your head. But certainly you haven't been hardwired to be happy and optimistic.
Yeah, right.
You've been hardwired to be alive. And I think we can get told all the time that we're a failure because of all these things. In fact, all these things are just part of who we are.
Yeah, right. What are some more of that 29 list? That's it. I'm going to play with that one for a bit. That was good.
Memory. Yeah, so memory's a big one. A lot of us use GoPros, don't we? We kind of, the lazy way of looking at it, the easy way of looking at it is going, my memory is like a GoPro and I can rewind a memory and it's like a video library in my head and I can go through it. And that's frankly complete bullshit. Your memories are hugely fallible. And, a fifth of people, when told by someone that something happened in their childhood, will have a false memory about it. Our memories are often, in remembering our memories actually disintegrate a bit or evolve or change. So our favourite memories are often the ones that have been Xeroxed so many times they're actually quite different from how they began. We're much more likely to remember things that reinforce our identity, who we are, who we want to be. So,
are memories more positive than they were?
yeah,
than the reality?
you'll often, not in every case, no, not at all, but you will, depending on what you believe yourself to be, what you want to be, you'll remember things in a certain light. So it's highly likely that if you make a stupid decision paragliding, you'll remember it in such a way that probably paints you in a more positive picture. And
Rather
we're
than
all
just
aware.
being purely stupid.
Yeah, exactly. So that
I
think we need to remember that when we land. To what degree can we rely on our memories for this? How have we walked it? We need to listen to other people's recollections of it as well, while also acknowledging that their memories are just as fallible. But
yeah, man, I just had this totally front and center recently. I did a podcast. I needed to put something up, and I've been working on this house so hard I haven't been recording much lately. And so I went back I just told a story of my sailing days in 2009, sailed from Bali up to Langkawi by myself. And it was just incredibly eventful, really, really gnarly trip, and really properly life-threatening in a few points. But, I wrote a story about this as soon as I got there. So, I was still pretty fresh, so back in 2009 when I did it, I wrote a story about it. And I've been up through that, the Java Sea and the Malacca Straits since then 2 more times. And they've been very eventful as well. One was after rescuing the boat from a drunk skipper a couple of years ago and went up to Thailand, up to Phuket. And when I read the story, I basically read it for the podcast. It was rather different than how I remembered it. So probably when I wrote it, it was not as it actually happened, even though that was immediately after the trip. But if certainly 12 years later, whatever it is, 11 years later, the major pieces had all happened. But, for example, at one point off of Singapore, I have to rescue these 2 guys. And the story I had always told was their boat was on fire, and they were signaling with fire, which they were. And I went and I just thought, and I was so scrambled and so exhausted and so tired. I went over and got on. I thought, are you kidding me? I have to rescue people in addition to what's already going on here. And, but when I read the story, they were just having engine trouble, but in my mind for the last 12 years, their boat was sinking and on fire, and I totally made that up. That's wasn't amazing. Happening at all.
Yeah.
It's amazing. That's amazing. A big difference from an engine problem. They were signaling with fire, but their boat wasn't sinking. Not according to my story, but in my mind, still talking to you right now, their boat was sinking. I saved these people from certain death. And that's not at all what happened. They had engine trouble, and they were just going, "Hey, can you give us some help?"
That is radically different.
Radically different. That's a huge difference.
It paints them in a different light. It paints the whole situation in a different light. It makes you more of a hero. Maybe that's part of it. It's interesting that you said they were signaling with fire, because that's probably enough of a cue. A lot of these memories are basically little networks of almost micro memories. So one bit of it will be fire, one bit of it will be ship, one bit of it at sea, me rescue. And so little bits of those may actually expand to become, well, it's not just fire, it's them on fire. That's a better story. And then maybe you told it like that once in the pub, and that's enough for it to evolve.
And fascinating. We had this grizzly bear thing with my dad when I was 9 years old. We were up in Glacier Bay, Alaska. We were on this boat. We go to shore, or I went to shore first, and there's so many fish going up the stream you could walk across them. And I'm so excited. I went back and I got a net. I thought I could just hang the net off the front of the dinghy and just catch salmon, and that didn't work. And so we went back in with a fishing pole. And my dad literally, wasn't any bait on it. He just threw it in the river and hooked a fish. It was solid with fish. And we were so, enraptured by this that we didn't see there was a grizzly bear fishing just up the stream from us. And brown bears in that part of the world are the biggest in the world because they eat so well, and they're massive. And I'm 9 years old, and I'm yanking on my dad's pants going, "Grizzly, grizzly, 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 grizzly." And he looks up and he doesn't have his glasses on, and he goes, "Dad, or son, that's just a log." And then the Grizzly stands up, right? So this is all I remember. All this. I'm 9, and then he just hucks the pole into the river because it's got this huge fish on it. And we run down the river and get in the dinghy. And when we get to the dinghy, the tide's gone out, so there's no water, and there's lots of pushing, and there's lots of panicking, and there's lots of, when the bear comes, I'll let him eat me, and you go back to the boat. There's all this heroism. But when he tells the story, the bear chases us. The bear didn't chase us. The bear was fishing. The bear had plenty to eat. He didn't care that we were even there. He just looked at us, and I don't even remember him standing up. But as the years go by, he tells this story all the time, and it got more and more and more radical. And I wonder, talking to you, does his brain really remember that the bear chased us, or did that, or he told the story once and that's how does he really remember it that way? Or because I remember that the bear never chased it. We never saw the bear again. And I think I know that that's a fact. I don't remember ever seeing that bear again. We ran down the river and got in the boat.
I think we have to be a bit aware that we probably go, cool bullshit, he's lying, he's just telling a tall tale. But you know what? I think having done this, there's a lot of people really believing memories of things that never happened.
Yeah. Like the fire guys. Honestly, that shocked me when I read the story. I went, wait, what? That doesn't sound like what happened, but obviously it is. Yeah. I would have written it down that I'd save people from a burning ship if that's what had happened. That sounds way better. But
it's not the way
blows my mind,
is it? I saved someone from a burning ship, but I'm going to write it down as a kind of slightly lamer version where I'm just
No, that's not what I would have done. No, exactly. I mean, it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
And then also there was a lot of crossover. I did this trip twice more in the ensuing years, and there were things from the other trips that in my mind had happened on the first. It all got messed up. Yeah. Pretty wild.
It can be like just putting a bit of a drop of blood in a glass of water, and then the whole it bleeds through the whole thing. One little detail can suddenly get added to the mix. But I think it seems that pessimistic people are slightly less vulnerable to these false memories than optimistic ones, probably because they're more critical.
Yeah.
But also, when you're in a good mood, you're more likely to believe a false memory. It appears.
So mood really affects things.
Mood is all part of it as well, And Tom Dodolodot, we were talking about, he'd added a few bits to his pre-flight checks, and one of them was like, you really need to check in on your feelings, on your emotions before you launch. It's not just helmet, harness, hang point. What's going on in your head and what's going on in your body as well? Are you hungry? If you're hungry, you can become hangry. If you're hangry, you become angry. If you're angry, you make rash decisions. All of these things have consequences. We have to be kind of aware of them when we're flying, don't we?
Yeah, we really do. I like this idea of kind of pre-flight checks, in that you have something that is a signal for, I'm not in it today. This isn't right. A buddy of mine has a 3 thing. If I have messed up 3 things, and these can be super minor, your Velcro isn't stuck on right, or you don't have your charger plugged in before you take off, whatever. Just 3 things. That's boom. That's okay. Wait a minute. Something is wrong. Something's wrong with my head. And I'm not in the right frame of mind. And maybe it's not the problem is that enough to not fly, or is that just a real check-in? I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, and assess. Because in the X Alps, something like that, there have been so many times where I feel fine. And I'm doing the air quotes for those of you listening, can't see Matt and I right now, but and yet you're massively dehydrated, or massively tired, or massively hangry, or whatever. All these things that are compounding things that you don't really often recognize until the race is over, and you go, wow, that was a close call, that one that we had up there at the Col.
Well, it's like it is just like slices of Swiss cheese, isn't it? With the holes in them. And if you get enough holes lining up with one another, you go through the big gap. And that's where you have the bad accident, isn't it? That's the classic kind of Swiss cheese model. So, I think, you don't want to go, if I don't meet these exact conditions, I'm not going to fly. That's not really going to be viable. But I think the key thing is that you get there and you give yourself the time to really think through, not only are the conditions okay, but is my head in the right space? And then you make a real decision, the decision that you're aware of, rather than just I think my biggest problem is I tend to race out the car, throw my kit on the ground, think I'm going to miss everything on, clamber into my harness, few cursory checks and go. I know that can be one of my vulnerabilities.
FOMO.
Yeah, just a bit of FOMO drives me to rush things, and then off I go, and then lo and behold, that strap's around the wrong way. You know it's going to happen in advance. It's ridiculous, but you do it anyway. So you have to go when you just give yourself those 10 minutes to run through everything. What's my body telling me? What's my head telling me as well?
How does confidence differ from optimism? In your models, is that one of the 29 things?
Well, overconfidence, there is an overconfidence bias. An overconfidence bias would mean that you are likely to blame bad things on external factors and good things on and ascribe good things to yourself. And that can be kind of a feature of over optimism.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we're all aware of, there are some people who will always go, it was the gust, it was this, it was someone else's fault, someone went here. And you need to check that, don't you? But I think also as you in a more colloquial way, as your skills develop, you become more confident to put yourselves in more challenging situations. But you have to make sure that those situations are all always roughly aligned with your level of confidence and ability, don't you?
Yeah, and that's the whole flow concept, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, it's really good as well, I think. I think that's really useful. Do you use that? Flow? Do you think about it?
I think about it a lot, and most of my best things have happened in a very nice flow state that I haven't consciously, enabled. It's something I've studied and I work on, and we talk a lot about it on the podcast. But it's, it definitely there are. I mean, one of many reasons, but I think the biggest reason the X-Alps is so addictive and things like that are so addictive is just the amount of flow you get, which of course has all the other side benefits, the endorphins and the dopamine and all the things, because you're basically in that state even when it's bad, for an extended period of time. It could be, just 12 days of being a lot, having a lot of flow. And one of the things that maybe your book even talks about, but it's, something I've brought up a lot on the show is coming down from that is, for me, has been brutal. I'm just awful, and I have been fortunate. I don't suffer from any kind of clinical depression, or at least that I know of, that kind of thing. But boy, it's close. The days after the race, there's the high of the achievement and the whole thing. But, there was not much harder in my life than getting to Monaco in 2015 and the next day. Well, now what do I do? This sucks. It's hot. It's concrete and it's over. And my whole everything, the team breaks up and everybody goes home. And now what? I mean, it's just, and you can see even Kriegel, who's talked about it as well, and the same thing, what most of these guys are doing to cover, and girls to cover for that, is just the next race.
Yeah.
They're not really dealing with it. They're just getting back into training and going to the next one, the next distraction.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, to be clear, what would put you in a flow state would basically scare the complete shit out of me. So we're obviously at very different flying standards, And so for everyone, someone might go into flow, I guess, if they're a beginner doing a top to bottom,
Sure.
if everyone,
Totally.
Everyone will find that, perfect line between, skills and the level of a task at a different rate. But yep. I totally, really familiar with what you're talking about there, the come down afterwards.
I mean, it's, I've never been an abuser either, but it's got to be very similar to coming off, a really good drug.
Yeah.
And the down is very intense.
Yeah. Just even just an hour up at Cloudbase or something, and all your memory, all your worries just seem to evaporate when you're in that kind of state, don't they? And then when you land, there's a little bit of, you get some euphoria, and then you can feel the real world sort of rushing in to fill the void again. And,
very quickly. Yeah. Yes. Very quickly. It all comes rushing back. I mean, I asked you about confidence too, because it's an interesting one. In that we really rely on it. I wouldn't want to go flying on a day where I wasn't feeling pretty confident. Yeah. That would be a red flag. And I guess one of the other reasons these hike and fly things are so addictive, and I'm sure comps are the same for a lot of people, is that you get in a level of confidence in the X Alps that is completely insane. Yeah. I mean, I can handle anything. And I'm not bragging. Everybody's like that in that race. You get to this point where it doesn't matter what the weather throws at you. You've got it. And you do the craziest shit over and over and over and over again, where, in the 9 months of hard training for it, I would never fly in those conditions. Yeah. And that's why Griegel's so good, because he trains in that stuff, but I don't have that move. I don't have that confidence level when I'm just training. I can't get there, if it's just nasty and awful and over the back and cross and over developing, I'm not going to go fly. That's taking your life into your hand. You could possibly die. Well, what's the difference? It's weird. But then you'll do it in the race over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. So when you do that in the race, do you think you're actually making decisions, or are you just competing and that's it? Do you just go into
Really good question. Yeah. Really good. I mean, there have definitely been, times where, okay, I'm scared, but boy, it's a headspace that is really outrageous and I'm sure very addictive and very powerful. Is it, you just get in this mode where, when Paul Guscherbauer landed in the river, I was right behind him and chatted with him. It just didn't throw him off a bit.
No.
His eyes, it was in him. It was in his face. It was in his thing, but just no big deal. Yeah. But at any other time, I think it would have been a pretty big deal. I think he would have got in the car and gone home and sat down with his wife and gone,
yeah,
oh, a little too much,
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, isn't it? Whether in the race, competitiveness.
Yeah, is that the thing? It's a good question.
We did do a chapter on kind of keeping up with the Joneses. This whole idea that, that you compete with those around you, and the people around you really, really important. They really, probably more than anything else, they influence who you are and how you think. Your friends, family, your peers. And it's quite difficult to break out from that, that other group. It's quite hard to make a stand to say, I don't want to do what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's relevant for paragliding as well, isn't it? Because, you're saying in the race, you start behaving in a completely different way. You do stuff you wouldn't dream of doing if you were just at home. Similarly, on launch, you might stand there and going, well, I don't like the look of that. It looks really gnarly, but everyone else is flying. Or you may be on launch going, looks totally fine to me. I have flown this site before and it's looked like that. I do have the skills. I have looked at the weather. And everyone else just seems to be doing that kind of car park talk,
Yeah. The whole ground suck game. So and I mean, and that's where the confidence comes into play. That on the good side, you don't want to be overconfident, but it's also when you show up and it's really cross and quite nasty, and it's but when you can show up and go, yeah, I've trained for that.
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to get plucked, and I know I'm going to nail this, and I'm going to take a little bit more time with my gear and make sure I don't have anything screwed up. But where you can just, I got it, and you look like Kriegel launching, and you've done it a million times, and that's the confidence you want versus I'm not sure if I got that move. That's a really scary place to be.
Yeah. I guess this comes back to the kind of that being a little bit pessimistic, running through the potential problems like getting plucked. Like if I launch in a cross, am I going to end up in the tree or, dragged or just looking like an idiot? I've done that loads of times. And then going, well, what am I going to do about it? And going, I guess this is Kriegel again as well, isn't it? I'm just going to try and find that little hole in the lee side rotor that I can fly through on its behind the spike back, and I will keep doing it until I can do it. And the more you practice, if you come up with a plan and go, let's be a bit pessimistic, where are my weak points? Well, it's launching cross, it's landing in small spaces. And then you go, okay, well, now being honest about that, I can start training to make those things better. And relieve some anxiety and risk in the process, because we tend to be most afraid of the things we don't understand.
Sure.
Yeah.
So memories are really fallible. Overconfidence can play a bad role.
Attention, we don't know what we're doing, or how we're making decisions. Intuition,
Intuition,
changing your mind. We're all vulnerable to confirmation bias. We look at, we prioritize information that reinforces our pre-existing beliefs.
Okay.
So be aware of that one. If everyone tells you that, no, if you believe that, or you really want to fly the east face of a certain, mountain, and someone tells you that it's okay, then you're probably more likely you'll give their advice more weight than maybe two people telling you that you shouldn't. Because you really want to do it. You believe it's okay, you did it before. One guy said it's okay, two said, but I'm more likely to go with the one that reinforces my pre-existing belief. So
that one got me in a heap of trouble. My first big offshore passage, this was 1999. I was up in Vancouver getting the boat ready, and there was a guy on the docks that had done a whole bunch of offshore racing. Kit, I still remember his name, and he had helped us with wind generators and some solar panels and stuff. And everybody there, a lot of really seasoned sailors, said there's one way to go down the west coast of North America at this time of year, because it was October. It was getting into the storm season. And storms come across pretty regularly from Japan that time of year. And they said, you hug the coast and you go into port, between the storms. And, there's all the ports along the Oregon and Washington and Northern California are all really bad sandbars, so if the waves are big, they can get pretty hairy, and the charts are pretty unreliable because there's so much swell and so much activity. They're moving the sandbars all over the place, so you can't really rely on them. It's a really easy place to get hung up. And but you call the Coast Guard if it's big, and they come out and they guide you in. So you're not really getting their help. They're not towing you in or something, but that's what they're there for. And especially at that time of year, everybody said that. Dozens of people, because this was our first big blue water passage. I was asking everybody. I didn't know what we were doing. And this one guy, Kit, said, "Nah, clear the Straits of Juan Fuca, go 200 miles offshore and just deal with whatever comes, and just battle it out, and that's what we did, because that sounded so cool. It was just." And before, when you go to sea for a long time, you get more and more and more humble all the time. You get more and more scared because the ocean is big and there's nothing you can do against it. But back then I just I'm going to have a battle. That'll be great. And we got our asses kicked. And it was just, we had all the information we needed. You know, all we needed to do was do what everybody said. But this one guy said, and that just sounded more sexy to me. Man, I've paid the price for that one a bunch of times. I wanted to hear that. No, let's battle it out. You know, deal with whatever comes.
And, you know, we do that. I think we're probably aware we do that with our politics or whatever. You know, if I read the paper most naturally, most enthusiastically, that reflects my political views, you know? Of course I do. And, you know, I now make deliberate attempt to read the other side as well as much as possible. But, you know, we're saying it's paragliding. There it is, isn't it? Or sailing. It's just one guy said it's fine, and I definitely wanted to throw myself off that mountain or, you know, make that crossing. So I'll do it.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you know, why? What was that about? But,
interesting.
We have brain's a weird thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we probably just, you know, we fetishize intelligence. We fetishize the rational mind, you know, but actually there's a lot of other things at play. And intelligence doesn't always lead you to make the right decisions. Rationale doesn't always. We constantly go into, you know, intuitions. You know, it's not wrong. It's not right. We just should be aware of it.
Does IQ have anything to do with it?
It comes into play in, obviously, IQ, intelligence. It can help us to make good decisions, but, you know, it's not everything. And I think, you know, sometimes we can give it a bit there are plenty, you can imagine there'd be plenty of people with a really high IQ who'd make absolutely blundering decisions paragliding or doing anything else in life. You know, it doesn't guarantee you. It doesn't guarantee that you make good decisions by any stretch.
Did you guys approach this at all in a sense? So I've been throwing around this kind of wonky, unscientific life. You know, when I talk to people, but it seems to me, you know, and I've been on the planet now 50 years. It seems to me that leading a pretty good life, if you have all kinds of luck, massive amount of luck, where you're born, who you're born to, and there's all these things that have nothing to do with our character or who we are or how good we are at navigating, you know, this thing we're trying to do called life. But it does seem like making good decisions, I would put up there in the really high priority part of it, because, you know, when you look at folks who are really struggling, you can often trace that back to a bad decision. Not always. You know, there's all kinds of suffering that has nothing to do with decision making, but it does seem like who you partner with, having children, where you live, there's a lot of things, where you work, there's a lot of things that decisions are a big part of coming back to happiness, joyfulness, however we want to define it. You know, and there seem to be people who just constantly make bad decisions versus more good than bad. I'm wondering if the approach at the book would, you know, did it help you understand that? Do you even agree with that, or is it just more luck?
I'm slightly less of a believer in the kind of good versus bad decision thing, because what is a good decision for me might be a bad decision for someone else. You know, each to their own. But I think the important thing is that you actively make decisions, good or bad.
You know? Make them.
You actually make them. You sit there and you decide, I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to own it. It might be a bad one, but if you keep making decisions and you're actively thinking about those decisions, then that for me is a positive thing. Rather than just sort of blundering through without considering it at all.
I like that you said that. Maybe just timing wise, but I'm listening to this whole thing on time management that Sam Harris had on his Waking Up app, and the guy, I can't remember his name now, but he is a wonderful series, and that was his thing. He said make the decision. That's one way to get a whole bunch of time back, is just to not stew on stuff, because we're given so many different. There's 30 kinds of mustard in the store these days. If you worry about the mustards, you're never going to make and you're going to be disappointed with the decision you make. Yeah. So just grab one. Just do it.
Make a decision. If it's big stuff like, your partner, do you move to the States rather than stay in the UK? Whatever it is, do I do the X-Alps again? I think you just need to don't get into a situation where you're kind of flushed down that metaphorical hanging valley and your only option is to end up in a tree, But before you get to that point in life, go, I am actively going to make a decision. I'm going to listen to my intuitions, my gut feelings on it, but I'm also going to engage my rational mind a bit on this big decision because it's a biggie.
Yeah.
And then once you own the decision, it's kind of like, well, it could go bad or it could go good, but at least it's my decision,
I was just going to ask, how does...
I'm not a leaf just, getting
blowing in the wind.
Down it. Yeah, exactly.
So given that we're so fallible and we make such bad decisions all the time, how about getting help from other people who have all the same biases and all these, should you, or is that just confusing?
No, I think the more you need to be aware of I guess put simply, in the like Christmas cracker size, solution here. I suppose the big one is pay attention to what you're thinking, be aware that your mind is fallible in all these extraordinary ways, and listen and engage with other people who are different to you, who have different perspectives, who exist outside your immediate bubble, and I don't mean your family bubble. I mean that, that echo chamber that we can all fall into. Is like, listen to other people, think broadly, engage, challenge yourself, even if that's, I'm going to read a thriller when I normally only read, a history book. It can be that simple, Question your routines and habits. We fall into routines because, again, we can't make decisions constantly all day. Do we really need, by falling into a routine, like I eat muesli for breakfast every morning? I don't. I often don't have anything because I'm too lazy even to make it. But, people eat muesli every day. Why? Because they don't want to think about what to have for breakfast every morning, because they want to think about something else. These are that sort of routines making sense. But when you fall into bad habits, whether that, that's paragliding or the rest of life, you need to be aware that you're in a bad habit. And similarly, that you can create good habits as well by giving yourself little cues and rewards for the type of behavior that you want to see in yourself. It's often about a reward.
Let me ask you a tough one here. I think maybe I think a lot of people fly for the escape, right? We kind of touched on this earlier a little bit, that it's one of the few things I've done in my adventure sports activity that you can't really do anything else. When you're flying, you're engaged. Right. Even if you're just ridge soaring, it's pretty hard to think about other stuff. How does that tie into what you're talking about right now? Which is kind of, to me, it's being mindful, being conscious of, the holes in our thinking and what we're trying to accomplish, and just making decisions. I don't know if those tie together very well. And on the one hand, you're trying to be unmindful because you're just, Jesus, I got to get away from this, whatever, the stress at work, and I'm reading from you that could be quite dangerous. You're escaping by doing something that is pretty risky.
Yeah. Are you saying that, are you asking whether if you go, are you just lazily running away from life's problems by going?
Yes.
I think we all deserve a holiday when we're in a privileged enough situation to have one, aren't we? You know, so sometimes we just need that break, whatever it is. For some people, it certainly wouldn't be flying. It would be picking up a book or going fly fishing or whatever it is they can do. But for us, I think it's okay that we take a break from our problems and go in and hurl ourselves, mindfully off a mountain. But I think all of these lessons as well can be applied to our life and to flying. So beforehand, whether it's what are my bad habits when I fly? How sharp are my intuitions when I fly, and how much should I listen to them? When I look back over my flights, did I just make up the reasoning for the decisions I made? Can I trust my memory of them afterwards? Did I just do it because I feel I wanted to keep up with the Joneses, or because I'm too optimistic? If I was more pessimistic, would I think more about risk and how to mitigate it? So you can kind of apply these things to your flying and probably be a bit safer and better at it while you do it. And it's obviously still fun. I hope.
Yeah. And that's a pretty good reason to just do it right there.
Yeah.
Just for the fun.
So
Matt.
Yeah.
Fascinating. The book, y'all, is Are You Thinking Clearly? 29 Reasons You Aren't and What to Do About It by Miriam Frankel and our guest, Matt Warren. Check it out. It's out in hardcover, and this is fascinating, buddy. I really appreciate your time, and I know we've just touched the bare surfaces of this stuff. So looking forward to reading your book. I wasn't able to do it before we did this podcast, but can't wait to read it, and can't wait to explore more of this stuff with you in the future. But thanks very much. I appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure, Gavin. Lovely to see you and speak with you. No one else can see you.
Congratulations on the book. As you know, I just went through that with the XC Mag team, and it's a big chore.
Yeah, I mean, writing a book definitely gets in the way of flying.
Yes, absolutely.
So
yeah.
Anyone who wants to do more flying should do less writing of a book. That's the ultimate lesson.
Before we sign off here, is there anything you want to say about where to get it, where to find out more, that kind of thing? You sent me a website, but it looks like it's on Amazon. It looks like it's on all the big ones.
It's about, probably, if you're wherever you are in the world, search it up on your own channels. The UK is the easiest place to buy it at the moment, and now it's spreading its way around the world. But Amazon US has it in Kindle form, audio book, and you can get it wherever you are, from booksellers as well.
Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate it, man. And it's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Take care.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account, of course. That'll be lifetime. And hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.